It's a Sunday afternoon in South London, February 2nd, 2020. Streatham High Road is busy, shoppers moving between stores, cyclists weaving through traffic, the ordinary rhythm of a weekend in the capital. Then, in just 62 seconds, that ordinary afternoon becomes a terror attack. A man runs down the pavement, knife in hand. Two people are stabbed before they even understand what's happening. Screams echo down the high street. Shops slam their doors, pedestrians scatter for cover. Armed police close in, shots fired, the attacker falls to the ground. But here's what makes this attack different from almost any other in British history. Those armed officers weren't responding to the incident, they were already there. They'd been watching the attacker for days. They saw him enter the shop, saw him steal the knife, tracked every step he took before he struck. This was a man under 24-hour surveillance by some of Britain's most elite counter-terror operatives. And yet, they couldn't stop what happened next. The question isn't whether police were watching Sudesh Amman. The question is, how does a terror attack unfold when armed officers are already in position? To understand how this happened, we need to go back 8 days to the moment Sudesh Amman walked out of prison. Welcome to UK True Crime Files. Please subscribe, like and share. Let's dive in. January 23, 2020. The gates of HMP Belmarsh swing open, and Sudesh Amman, 20 years old, walks free. He served just 13 months of a 40-month sentence, released automatically under British law at the halfway point of his term. This isn't parole, it isn't early release for good behaviour, it's a legal requirement. Once an offender reaches the midpoint of their sentence, the prison has no choice but to let them go. Amman's crimes were serious. In December 2018, he'd pleaded guilty at the Old Bailey to 13 terrorism offences. 6 counts of possessing documents useful for terrorism. 7 counts of disseminating terrorist publications. The evidence against him was disturbing. Bomb-making manuals, knife-fighting guides, close combat instructions. All stored on his devices, all shared online. But it went further than that. Amman had been caught attempting to radicalize children, sharing graphic execution videos in a family group chat that included young relatives. He'd sent beheading footage to his teenage girlfriend, urging her to kill her own parents because they weren't believers. He was 18 when he was sentenced, British-born, of Sudanese heritage, and by every measure available to the court, an active threat. Yet the law was clear. Amman had served half his time. He was entitled to automatic release. No parole board hearing, no risk assessment that could override the statute. Just a date on the calendar and a legal obligation to open the gate. But inside Belmarsh, people were worried. Prison staff and Metropolitan Police officers had been watching Amman's behaviour during his sentence. And what they saw convinced them of one thing: he was leaving prison more dangerous than when he'd arrived. They tried to stop his release, but the law gave them no power to keep him inside. HMP Belmarsh isn't just any prison. It's Britain's highest security facility, the place where the country sends its most dangerous offenders. Terrorists, organised crime bosses, those considered too risky for anywhere else. Security is absolute, every movement monitored, every interaction logged, and it was inside those walls that Sudesh Amman spent 13 months. What prison officers observed during that time was deeply troubling. Amman didn't keep his head down, he didn't show remorse, didn't engage with de-radicalization programs, didn't give any indication that his views had softened. Instead, he sought out other convicted terrorists. He gravitated toward men who shared his ideology, forming bonds, discussing their beliefs openly, reinforcing each other's hatred. Officers documented conversations where Amman expressed contempt for non-believers, admiration for acts of violence, unwavering commitment to his extremist worldview. This wasn't subtle, this wasn't hidden. Amman made no effort to conceal what he thought or what he intended to do once he was released, and that openness, that complete lack of pretense, set off alarm bells throughout the system. Intelligence reports flagged him as an immediate threat upon release. the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terror Command took the unusual step of formally requesting that the prison governor extend Amman's sentence. They laid out the evidence, the behavior, the associations, the stated intentions. They argued that releasing him would put the public at immediate risk. But here's the problem. Under the sentencing framework in place at the time, the 2008 Criminal Justice Act, there was no legal mechanism to keep a prisoner beyond their automatic release date. No emergency provision, no risk-based override, no parole board with the power to say no. The prison governor had no authority to act on the police request. The law was inflexible and the clock was ticking. On the 23rd of January 2020, the prison gates opened and Sudesh Amman walked straight into the most intensive surveillance operation in recent British history. The moment Amman stepped outside Belmarsh, he became a monitored man. But the surveillance wasn't what you might expect for someone flagged as an immediate terror threat. Initially, the Metropolitan Police assigned unarmed officers to track him, and only for a few hours each day. Not around the clock, not with armed backup, just periodic visual monitoring to see where he went, who he met, what he did. He was fitted with a GPS tag, required to live at a bail hostel in Streatham, required to report his movements. On paper, it looked like control. In reality, it was a thin safety net stretched over a man the authorities believed could strike at any moment. For the first 7 days, Amman did nothing alarming. He attended his probation appointments on time. He stayed at the hostel, followed the rules, kept a low profile. To the officers watching him, he appeared compliant, perhaps even subdued. There were no meetings with known extremists, no suspicious behavior, no indication that anything was brewing. It was almost ordinary. But on the 8th day, February 1st, 2020, something changed. That morning, Amman left the bail hostel and boarded a bus heading towards Streatham High Road. Surveillance officers followed at a distance, watching as he stepped off in the shopping district, just another face in the Saturday crowds. Then he began visiting shops. First stop, Screwfix, a hardware and tools retailer. Officers watched as Amman wandered the aisles, scanning shelves, lingering in sections with no clear purpose. He picked up nothing. He bought nothing. After several minutes, he simply left. Next, Poundland. This time he made purchases. 4 bottles of Iron Brew, the Scottish soft drink, a roll of tin foil, brown parcel tape. Ordinary items, but together they formed a pattern that experienced counter-terror officers recognized immediately. His final stop was a discount shop that sold kitchen supplies, tools, and knives. Amman studied the knife display carefully. His eyes moved across the blades, assessing, calculating. He didn't buy one, not yet. But officers watching knew he'd made a mental note. He'd marked this shop for later. What happened next would trigger an immediate escalation and bring MI5 into the operation. The moment those purchases were logged, alarm bells rang throughout the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terror Command. Experienced officers knew exactly what they were looking at. Iron Brew bottles, the right size and shape, tin foil for wrapping, parcel tape for binding. These weren't random shopping choices. This was the material list for constructing a fake suicide vest, a hoax device designed to look real enough to terrify, to paralyze emergency response, to buy precious seconds during an attack. And Amman had visited a shop selling knives. The surveillance assessment changed immediately. Within hours, the unarmed officers tracking Amman were quietly pulled back. In their place, the Metropolitan Police deployed MO-19, now known as SCO-19, the Specialist Firearms Command. These weren't ordinary police constables, they were elite armed officers trained specifically for counter-terror operations, capable of making split-second decisions in active threat scenarios. But it didn't stop there. MI5, Britain's domestic security service, joined the operation. This was now a joint surveillance effort, combining the Met's tactical capabilities with the intelligence service's resources and expertise. The surveillance became total, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sudesh Amman was watched. Every movement tracked, every location noted, every person he came near monitored. Armed officers rotated shifts, maintaining constant visual contact, ready to intervene the moment he made a move. Amman didn't know it yet, but he was now the most closely monitored individual in Britain. The covert operatives blended into the streets around his bail hostel. Motorcycles maintained mobile surveillance, armed response units positioned within rapid deployment range. The operation consumed significant resources, dozens of officers, round-the-clock coordination, intelligence analysts tracking patterns. This was the highest level of surveillance the British state could deploy without arresting someone. And the question everyone was asking, was it enough? Back at the bail hostel that night, Amman locked himself in his room and began constructing something that would paralyze emergency response when it mattered most. Inside his locked hostel room, Sudesh Amman worked methodically. He took the 4 iron brew bottles and wrapped each one carefully in tinfoil, creating cylindrical shapes that, from a distance, could pass for pipe bombs or explosive devices. Then he bound them together with the brown parcel tape, creating a vest-like structure that could be strapped across his chest. It wasn't real. There were no explosives, no detonators, no actual threat of explosion. But it didn't need to be real. It just needed to look real enough. To force armed police to treat him as a suicide bomber, to create hesitation, to delay medical response, to maximize the chaos he was about to create. The surveillance operation tracking his every move outside the hostel couldn't see what he was doing inside his locked room. The GPS tag on his ankle told officers where he was, but not what he was building. By the morning of February 2nd, the device was complete. Amman woke early. He strapped the fake vest across his body, then pulled a long coat over it, concealing the bulk underneath. He checked his appearance, adjusted the coat, ensured nothing visible would give him away. Then he walked downstairs. At the hostel reception, he stopped briefly to speak with a member of staff. The conversation was unremarkable, polite, calm, giving absolutely no indication of what was about to unfold. The staff member would later recall nothing unusual about his demeanor. No tension, no nervousness, no final words that hinted at his intentions. Amman walked out the front door and into the February morning. Within seconds, an armed surveillance officer on a motorcycle picked up visual contact. The officer maintained a careful distance, tracking Amman's movements as he walked toward the main road, then boarded a bus heading for Streatham High Road, the shopping district where he'd visited those 3 shops just 2 days earlier. Other officers received the alert and began moving into position. Plainclothes operatives, armed, trained for exactly this scenario, filtered onto the pavements along Streatham High Road, blending with the Sunday morning shoppers. They had no idea how little time they had left. As Amman stepped off the bus and walked toward the discount shop, multiple armed officers were already in position along the pavement, watching, waiting, ready to respond the moment he made a move. Streatham High Road, 1:58 p.m. Sudesh Amman walks into the discount shop, the same one he'd visited 2 days earlier. Surveillance officers outside maintain visual contact, watching through the windows as he moves directly to the knife display. No hesitation, no browsing. He reaches out, grabs a 20-centimeter blade from the rack, and runs. Shop staff shout, one begins to chase. Outside, a surveillance officer sees the sudden commotion, sees people scattering, then sees the knife in Amman's hand, glinting in the afternoon light. The operation shifts in an instant, from monitoring to active threat response. Amman sprints down the pavement, scanning for targets. The first person he reaches is Monica Lanier, a teacher in her 50s, cycling home after meeting friends for coffee. She has no warning, no chance to react. Amman lunges, the blade strikes her back. She falls from her bicycle, injured but conscious. The attack so sudden she barely understands what's happened. Amman keeps moving. Within seconds he reaches a man in his 40s, walking along the high street. Another strike, this one deeper, more violent. The man collapses, his injuries life-threatening, blood spreading across the pavement. People are screaming now, running into shops, ducking behind cars, desperately trying to get away from the man with the knife. Armed surveillance officers are already closing in. Two plainclothes officers, firearms drawn, sprint toward Amman from different angles. They're shouting commands, trying to get civilians clear, trying to end this before anyone else gets hurt. Amman spins around and sees them coming. For a moment, confusion crosses his face. He didn't expect this, didn't know he'd been under armed surveillance, didn't anticipate police being right there, already in position. But he raises the knife anyway, advancing toward the officers. They have seconds to assess. A man with a blade moving aggressively, wearing what appears to be a bulky vest under his coat. 3 shots ring out. Amman staggers, drops to the pavement. The knife clatters away. More shots, ensuring the threat is neutralized. Officers move forward cautiously, weapons still trained, and that's when they see it clearly. The vest, strapped across his chest, cylindrical shapes visible through the torn coat. Wires, tape, the unmistakable profile of what looks like an explosive device. The officers fall back immediately. Suspected IED, all units withdraw to safe distance. The street, already chaotic, becomes a frozen tableau. Amman lies motionless on the pavement, but no one can approach him. Armed response units establish a cordon, pushing everyone back, clearing buildings, evacuating shops. If that vest is real, if it's rigged to detonate on a dead man's switch or timer, anyone who gets close could be killed. The Metropolitan Police's explosive ordnance disposal team is scrambled, specialists racing across London to assess the device. Until they arrive, until they can confirm what's real and what isn't, emergency medical services cannot reach Amman. The wait stretches on. 62 seconds. That's how long the attack lasted, from the moment Amman grabbed the knife to the moment he fell. But now, more than an hour passes while bomb disposal experts approaches, scan and carefully examine the vest. Finally, the confirmation comes through. It's fake. Iron brew bottles, tin foil, tape. An imitation designed to look real, to create exactly this delay. Paramedics move in, but it's been over 80 minutes since the shooting. Sudesh Amman is pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, Monica Lanier and the second victim have already been rushed to hospital. The man's injuries required emergency surgery, touch and go for hours. A third person, struck by flying glass when police opened fire, is treated for minor wounds. Miraculously, all 3 victims survive. In just over a minute, a terror attack had unfolded on a busy London high street. Despite the presence of armed officers who'd been tracking Amman for days, who were positioned along the very street where he struck, who responded within seconds of the attack beginning. And yet, 2 people were still stabbed. 2 people still nearly died. The question that would dominate the inquest, the investigations, the public debate, was this preventable? Monica Lanier survived, but the attack changed her life. The knife wound to her back required surgery and months of recovery. Beyond the physical injuries, there was the psychological toll, the randomness of it. Cycling home on an ordinary Sunday, attacked by a stranger for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong moment. The second victim, the man in his 40s whose injuries were life-threatening, underwent emergency surgery that saved his life. His recovery took far longer, multiple procedures, extensive rehabilitation, permanent scars both visible and invisible. The third victim, injured by glass fragments during the shooting, received treatment for minor wounds and was released from hospital. All 3 lived, and in the context of what Amman intended, that survival felt almost miraculous. Streatham itself was shaken. This wasn't a symbolic target or a high-profile location. It was a neighborhood high street, places where people shopped for groceries, met friends for coffee, went about their daily lives. The attack brought terror into the ordinary, and that proximity, that sense that it could happen anywhere, unsettled communities across London. In May 2021, a coroner's inquest examined the events of that February afternoon. The central legal question was whether the police shooting of Sudesh Amman was lawful. The jury heard evidence from the armed officers involved, their assessment of the threat, the split-second decision-making, the rules of engagement that governed when they could use lethal force. The verdict, lawful killing. The officers had acted appropriately given the circumstances. A man armed with a knife, having just committed 2 stabbings, advancing toward them while apparently wearing an explosive device. Their response, the jury concluded, was justified and proportionate. But the inquest went further. It examined the timeline, not just of the attack itself, but of the days and weeks leading up to it. And here the findings became uncomfortable. The coroner noted that from the moment Amman stole the knife to the moment armed officers fired, approximately 60 seconds had passed. In that minute, surveillance had transitioned to intervention, but the window for prevention had already closed. The inquest acknowledged what everyone already knew. The officers watching Amman couldn't act until a crime was in progress. They couldn't arrest him for visiting shops, for buying bottles and tape, for studying knife displays. British law doesn't allow police to detain someone for what they might do, only for what they've done. And by the time Amman had done something, 2 people had already been stabbed. The inquest also scrutinized the legal framework that had mandated Amman's release from prison in the first place, despite clear intelligence that he remained dangerous, despite formal requests from police to extend his sentence. But the inquest raised a more troubling question, one that exposed cracks in Britain's counter-terror system that went far beyond a single case. The Streatham attack exposed 3 interconnected failures, each one a crack in the system that together created the conditions for tragedy. The first failure was legal. Under the Criminal Justice Act 2008, prisoners serving fixed-term sentences were entitled to automatic release at the halfway point. No exceptions, no risk assessment that could override that date, no parole board empowered to say a prisoner was too dangerous to release. Sudesh Amman had served 13 months of a 40-month sentence. The law said he must be freed, and the law offered no mechanism to keep him inside, regardless of what prison intelligence suggested about his intentions. This wasn't an oversight by individual officials, this was the statute itself, applied exactly as written. The second failure was resourcing. When Amman was first released, surveillance was part-time and unarmed. A few hours of monitoring each day, officers without firearms, coverage that left significant gaps. It took his reconnaissance trips, his Poundland purchases, his visit to the knife shop, before the operation escalated to 24-hour armed surveillance. That delay, those first 7 days when he was watched but not intensively, represented a vulnerability window. Amman didn't exploit it, but he could have. And even after MI5 and armed officers took over, the surveillance, comprehensive as it was, consumed enormous resources. Dozens of personnel, round-the-clock shifts, coordination across multiple agencies. Britain's counter-terror apparatus can maintain that level of monitoring for a handful of individuals, but not for dozens, not for hundreds. The question becomes, who gets watched and how closely? The third failure was the most fundamental, the impossibility of intervention. Even with armed officers positioned along Streatham High Road, even with Amman under constant watch, they couldn't act until he committed a crime. British law requires evidence of an offence, not prediction of one. Buying bottles and tape isn't illegal. Visiting a shop that sells knives isn't illegal. Building a fake suicide vest in your locked room, technically illegal, but invisible to surveillance outside. The only moment police could intervene was the moment Amman grabbed that blade and ran. By then, it was already too late to prevent the attack. All they could do was stop it from becoming worse. These are questions of policy and resourcing, not individual officer conduct. The surveillance team, the armed officers who fired, the prison staff who flagged concerns. Everyone at the operational level acted according to their training and the law as it stood. The failure was structural. Within weeks of the Streatham attack, the government introduced emergency legislation. The Terrorist Offenders Act 2020 ended automatic release for those convicted of terrorism offences. From that point forward, every terror offender would face a parole board hearing before release, a risk assessment that could keep them imprisoned beyond the halfway point if they remained dangerous. The law changed, but it changed after Streatham, not before, and that timing raises the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this case. The legal framework that released Sudesh Amman, the resourcing decisions that delayed intensive surveillance, the intervention constraints that prevented police from acting earlier, all of these were known problems before February 2nd, 2020. Experts had warned about automatic release for terror offenders. Police had requested additional powers. The gaps were visible, but it took 2 people being stabbed on a London high street before the system changed. The Streatham attack is remembered for what it revealed, more than for what happened. 2 people were stabbed, but both survived. A terrorist was killed, but only after committing violence. Armed police responded within seconds, but those seconds came too late to prevent the attack entirely. What makes this case unusual in the history of British terrorism isn't the scale of the violence, it's the visibility of the failure. Sudesh Amman didn't slip through the cracks. He was being watched by some of the most capable surveillance operatives in the world. Officers who tracked his movements, documented his behavior, positioned themselves along the very street where he would strike, and yet it still happened. That paradox forces an uncomfortable reckoning with what surveillance can and cannot achieve. Monitoring tells you where someone is, what they're doing, who they're meeting. It creates an evidence trail, enables rapid response, allows intervention the moment a threat becomes action. But it doesn't prevent intent. And under British law, it can't justify arrest before a crime occurs. There are questions this case cannot answer definitively. Would different sentencing laws have kept Amman in prison long enough for de-radicalization to work? Or would he have remained dangerous regardless of how long he served? Would earlier deployment of armed surveillance have deterred him, or simply changed the timing and location of his attack? Could any system, no matter how well resourced or legally empowered, truly prevent a determined individual from committing violence? These are questions without clear answers, and perhaps that's the most unsettling lesson of Streatham. What we do know is the human cost. Monica Lenner carries the scars of that afternoon. The second victim endured surgeries and a long recovery. A community was traumatized. Armed officers were forced into split-second decisions that will stay with them for life. And the system evolved. The Terrorist Offenders Act closed the automatic release loophole. Parole boards now assess risk before any terror offender walks free. Surveillance protocols were reviewed, resourcing debates intensified, intervention thresholds re-examined. But those changes came after, not before. The Streatham attack didn't fail because officers weren't watching. It happened while they were watching, exposing the limits of surveillance alone and the price of waiting until intent becomes action. That distinction between monitoring and prevention remains one of the most difficult challenges in modern counterterrorism, and it's a challenge that didn't begin with Sudesh Amman, and won't end with him either. If careful analysis of cases like this matters to you, where the system itself becomes part of the story, not just the crime, a subscribe helps us continue this level of investigation. And if you remember Streatham that day, or have perspective on counter-terror policy and its limits, share your thoughts respectfully below. These conversations matter,